Okay, so someone has their hand raised. Okay, good to know. So most people aren't, yeah, mostly not familiar with Django. Well, I'm going to be diving into third-party Django library called Django Channels. So this allows you to take Django, which in its core just does HTTP and synchronous web pages. And you can add Websockets, which is a great protocol for writing data back and forth from the server. And then a couple other features, you can build really interactive applications. And so in this talk, we're going to be walking through how to build a basic chat application. So you'll be able to send a message, and then everyone else on the connected will receive it. So we'll walk through the basics. So yeah, we're going to build a real-time chat application. It's going to be Django plus channels, and then just a little bit of JavaScript. And then yeah, channels at its core takes Django and allows us to create an event-driven architecture instead of a resource-driven architecture. So yeah, channels provides two major features to Django: long-living connections like WebSockets, as opposed to HTTP connections, which only live for as long as the request response, and then an event breaker called the channels layer, and that's how you communicate in between people, is through an event broker. So this is what Django looks just on its own. Nice and simple. That's one of the big advantages of Django is you have requests that come in, and then there's the middleware stack, turns it into just a function call. And then that's a view function, and then you return a response. And there are class-based views, but that's also really just a function. I prefer to do all my views as functions. Now, Django with channels is quite a bit more complicated. But one of the advantages of channels is that it preserves those view functions, and they work exactly the same way. You don't have to worry about these other layers if you just want to add channels to your existing Django application. So you can progressively add it on. You don't have, if you're just starting with Django, which a lot of people here might experiment with it, you can always add channels to do cool stuff later, like adding real-time data to your website in some small way. So a concept that's good to know about is scope. And so that's what I was talking about before, the lifetime of a connection. So for HTTP, the scope is just the response cycle. So there's nothing saved in between. That's why HTTP is a stateless protocol. WebSockets, the life of the connection is just until either the client or the server closes the connection. And so within that time span, either side can write back and forth, and the connection does have state. So an HTTP request scope is just simple client request response profit. And then WebSocket, as you can see, is a bit more complicated. That's why it's preferable to use an HTTP in a situation where you're just asking for one thing. You don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be. So I'll go ahead and switch now. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up a demo. I've just got Visual Studio Code set up. So if you want to follow along, that's fine. But as Dan said, this is going to be recorded. So it might be easier to follow along later. So just a few things first. As always, is this big enough for everyone? Anyone want to raise their hand if they want me to increase the font size?
I think it looks good, Paul.
Okay, great. So I'm going to create a virtual environment. So that way we just keep all our dependencies separate. You don't really need to do this, but I always do this. And then we're going to enter that virtual environment. And then, so we've got a fresh package install. So we're going to have to install Django, and we're going to install channels, and that's all we're going to need for now. So that'll just take a second. And there we go. So now we've got our virtual environment. We want to start a new Django project. So Django admin, start project, just call it my site. Oh, I think I see the problem. I got to reopen this actually. Oh, that's weird. Let me just try that again. Okay, yeah, it didn't work before for some reason. That's odd. Source. Pardon that. Okay, now we can start Django admin, start project, my site. And we've got all our basic setup. So we'll go and open up settings.py. We're not really going to worry about setting up anything else except channels. So we need to set up an ASGI application. So this is WSGI stands for Web Server Gateway Interface. ASGI stands for Asynchronous Server Gateway Interface. This is on the underline Django. This is how it connects to like a web server. We need to have an asynchronous web server. So this is just a little boilerplate, not to really be worried about. You're unlikely to ever change this. So just go my site routing application. And then we need to also add to our installed apps. This is always an easy step to forget, add channels. And then go ahead and open up, create a new module called routing.py. So this will take care of routing all our requests for application. So from channels.routing import protocol type router. And then we need to define application equals protocol type router. And then we're going to put some more stuff here, but let's just pause and actually run the server now. So Python manage.py run server. Oops, I got to change directory into my site, and then run the server. There we go. And right here, as you can see, it's an ASCII channels application. So under the hood, things are running a little bit differently than they would be normally for a Python application. And I should add, I forgot to at the beginning of this presentation, the goal with Django, with channels, is to introduce some of these features, asynchronous WebSockets, that will eventually be added into the Django main framework. Because the idea with Django is that it's the batteries included framework. It comes with templating and the Django ORM. So that's what I really love about Django, but it's still kind of experimental right now. So yeah, we've got things running. I'm just going to quickly, before I forget, Python manage.py migrate, just so we have our basic user model set up, because we're going to be using that a little bit later. So now, like I said at the beginning, channels does not actually interfere with writing regular Django views. So we're going to just create a basic homepage for our site. So this is, if you're familiar with Django, this is just how you set up a home. So this is setting up the URL. Getting ahead of myself, actually, we haven't actually created an application. I got to create an application. So Python manage.py start app. Everything in Django is organized into an application. Python manage.py start app chat. We're just going to need one application for this. And before I forget, add chat to our installed apps in settings. And now we can start setting up our URL. So we'll just have the empty URL go to the chat views.home. So that'll be our home view. So now I've got to just import that from chat .chat import views as chat views. So we're kind of going backwards here. This hasn't been created yet. We'll just jump into chat views.py and we'll define home. And if I make any mistakes, anyone is free to point them out because I often do make typos. And then request. So as I was saying before, every view is just a function in Django. And we're going to make this a simple one. It's just going to return a plain HTML page, return render request, and then chat/index.html. And now we've just got one step left. That was, yeah. We're going to just have to create this index.html. So that always lives in the same place in the templates file, and then the name of the application, so chat, and then index.html. Now we're going to create a basic HTML5 page, just using a nice snippet there. This is going to be our chat room. And we're not going to use this till later, but I'm going to go and define out what everything looks like. We're going to have a text area. This is where the chat messages are going to live. Oops. Let me take advantage of that snippet. So we don't need to have a name. We do need to have an ID since we're going to be doing a little JavaScript later. Chat message input. Sorry, chat log. That's what this one is. We'll just change it, make it a little wider, a little taller. And we'll add a break. And then we need a place to actually put the text in for the chat. So input, it's going to be text. It's going to have an ID of chat message input, type equals text. Oh wait, I already did that, sorry. Size equals 100, just to match the chat log right above it. Do another break. And then we just need a button to press to actually send our messages. So that type will be button, ID will be chat message submit, and value will be send. All right, so now we can go back to the console and Python manage.py run server. We should be able to see all this. All right, great. So we'll just grab a tab in here. And did I make it? I made it too many rows. What did I do, 300 rows? Oh, 200. I just want 20. There we go. That looks good. So this is where our messages are going to go. We're going to click send, and they're going to appear up here. So now we've done the basic kind of Django setup. We're going to get into some of the more juicy channel stuff. So first we need to go back to our routing.py and actually set some stuff up here. So a little bit about this. This application, this router, will actually handle everything that comes in to Django, so that passes through the server. But by default, it will just redirect anything that's HTTP to our urls.py. But now we are going to set up routing for incoming WebSocket requests. But first, before I do that, does anyone have any questions, Dan?
No questions right now. I guess reminder everyone in the bottom left, there's a area to ask your questions.
All right, cool. So let's see. What we're going to do is, before we get into making a chat room, I'm just going to set it up so that there's a WebSocket connection, and you'll just get an echo of anything you send. So that's just a simple thing we can do. So we're going to import a few more things. We're going to import a URL. Where am I at here? URL router. Actually, I'm not sure if that's. Yeah, I think it's that. And we're also going to import from channels.auth, import the auth middleware stack. This will allow us to actually use authentication in our WebSockets. I'm not sure we're going to get to that today. Just to let you know that in WebSockets, you can actually use the user model and actually call to the database and stuff like that. So now we're going to set up the URL. Oh wait, first we have to define, since this protocol type router is a dictionary, we're going to specify that all WebSocket traffic, WebSocket being the key, will be going to auth middleware stack. So that's going to wrap around any request that comes in. So we can use authentication, and then URL router chat.routing.websocket URL patterns. So we haven't defined this yet, so yeah, that's going to throw an error down there. So we're going to go into chat and we're going to define a routing.py. So from Django.urls import path, and then from this directory import consumers, and we're going to go define that in just a minute. We're going from the top down here, and then we just have to define those WebSocket URL patterns. Just as the same way you would normally divide up your URLs, you'd split them up into each app would contain its own URLs. And now we're going to pick a path. So I always like to start WebSocket paths with WS and then /chat. And then we need to have a consumer for this chat. So we're going to do consumers.ChatConsumer. And now we're going to define consumers.py. So from channels.generic.websocket import WebSocket consumer. This is our base class we're going to use. It does a lot of work for us. And we're also going to need JSON. Import JSON. And we're going to define our chat consumer. So a view function can be a function because there's just one thing that happens. There's a request. With a WebSocket, there are three things that can be triggered by the user. There's the connect, there's the receive, and then there's the disconnect. So that's why this has to be a class. So first we're going to define connect. And all we need to do for connect is just self.accept. This is just a little bit of boilerplate we have here. And then we do need to define receive. So what is going to happen when the user sends us a little bit of text data? Because that's what you essentially write back and forth over the over the WebSocket. So this text data is going to be JSON, just formatting for objects. So we're just going to go and interpret that. We're going to deserialize that. So we're going to use JSON, and then we're going to load string, this text data. So now it's a dictionary-like object we can manipulate. And I haven't mentioned this, but the way we're going to communicate back and forth is a JSON object that's going to have one field, which is just going to be message, and then it's going to contain a value of whatever the message is. So we're going to, for this echo, we're going to just change it a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and text data, JSON. We'll get that single message key, and we're going to add echo. That way we know it came back from the server. And then next, we're going to send this back to the user. So we also need to send it as just as a string. So we're going to need to use json.dump s. So take this dictionary, text data JSON, turn it into a string, and we'll just send it right back.
This is a.
Any questions? I assume that was an accidental turning on the mic.
Deserializing.
Deserializing. So serializing is taking a object, in our case, just a Python object, like a dictionary, and turning it into a string. So in a serial format that anything can read, and then deserializing is taking a string and then turning it into an object we can actually use in the code. And so JSON is just JSON being short for JavaScript object notation is just a really easy, commonly used format for the web.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So now the next thing we're going to do is one last step. Go into our HTML page and define how we're going to actually communicate with the WebSocket from the front part now. So I'll go ahead and create a script. So first things first, we need to actually connect to our WebSocket. So we'll just go ahead and all of this is just vanilla JavaScript. So you can just, don't need to import anything, don't need to use npm. You can literally just create the script tag and it'll work in any browser pretty much. Although I can't speak to Internet Explorer. So we're going to create a chat socket bar, and that's going to be a new WebSocket, which is part of, I'm not sure which version of JavaScript it is. I don't really know too much about JavaScript. I mostly copied this from the channels documentation because I'm not a front-end developer. So we just need to put in a path to connect to. So just go ahead and do ws, just ws// just like since the HTTP, we're defining our protocol here. And then we want the host. So we can do window location host. This will just ask JavaScript, hey, what website are we connected to for this page? So that's a nice thing. So if we decide to deploy this later to something, we don't have to worry. We don't have to manually set this to a string called localhost. And then we just do the path just like we defined in our routing, ws chat. Just go ahead and type that out, ws chat. So this handles connecting to our WebSocket, and that opens it up. And now we're going to handle when we receive a message. So when the server sends the client a message, so this chat socket variable has an on message attribute. It's going to be equal to function. And so I apologize for doing some JavaScript in the Python meetup, but it's kind of, if you're going to be in the web, it's kind of unavoidable. Var data equals json.parse e.data. So this is deserializing now. Actually, sometimes I get it backwards. Yeah, deserializing, we're taking a e.data, which is just a byte array, turning it into a JavaScript object. We're going to get the message out of that object. So I guess the nice thing about JavaScript is it does look a lot like Python sometimes. They do have some similarities. And then we're going to do take the document query selector. So this is how we manipulate our HTML up here. We're going to take our chat log. Oops. And we're going to add the value of that. We're going to add our message. So message. And just add a new line at the end. Yep, that's good. So that's how we receive. Now we're just gonna, just for convenience sake of debugging, the onClose attribute, we're also gonna define, there's nothing much you really can do if the socket closes, so we'll just do a console dot error chat socket closed, just so we know what happened. And the same thing here, actually, we're going to do a console.log e.data, just so we can, if there is some kind of problem, we can check the log, see if what's going on. And now lastly, how do we send over the chat socket? So here we're going to start with a document query selector again, and now we can use an event that happens on our chat message. Oops. Dang it. Chat message submit. So when anyone ever this button, as you will call, anyone clicks this, triggers the on click. And this is also equal to a function. So we need to get, so just a bit of JavaScript weirdness. First we get the, I'm actually not even sure what this object is. This contains more than just the information, but we can get the actual message as such. Value, there we go. So this is just the plain text of our message, but we need to put it in a JavaScript object in order to send it back to the server. So we'll just go and take our chat socket object, and then it has a handy send function, and then we just use JSON and stringify. I guess that's a more intuitive word than serialize, stringify, but they're actually the same thing. And then this would just contain, it'll just have one attribute with one value, message. And now we should be good. And actually, added measure will take the message input dom.value. Again, this is our chat message input. We're just going to set this to an empty string. So whenever you create send a message, it'll just clear out the message box. Okay, so that is all we need to do to have this basic echo consumer. So let's go ahead, and this seems to be stuck here, so I'll go and restart it. There's probably some mistake stuck in there. Interesting. Chat is not defined. I probably forgot to import that. Ah, yes, I did. From, see, we want to import chat.routing. That's right. There we go. So now we should be able to connect to our site, and we'll actually be working with a WebSocket. So go to our local host, test. Interesting. That's, I figured there'd be something. There always is. Still in connecting to socket closed. Okay, so something wrong. Yes, interesting. What do have we here? No route found, WS chat. Let's go to our routing. Let me check. Is there supposed to be a slash before that WS? Huh, there's not supposed to be. Oh, did I forget? Yes, the slash after chat. I don't think I actually need to restart the server, but just to force a habit. Let's open up. And so no disconnect. Hit send. JSON is not defined. Ah, yes, I forgot. JSON in all caps when it for JavaScript. There we go. Did I forget? Oh, I saved that. Okay. Yeah, we're connected. There we go. And it echoes. So we got something working now. Very good. Any questions? Ben?
No questions right now. Feel
Okay.
free everyone to ask questions in chat, everyone.
Okay, so we've been going for about 40 minutes. Let's see, just a quick demonstration about how this works. Since we're really right now treating this like HTTP, we're only sending one response. We can do more with this. Since this object persists, it stays here as long as the socket is open, we can write data whenever we want. So I can just import time. And then just while true, just do an infinite loop. And we'll just send it back forever. So we'll just do time.sleep for 1 second. So if I go back to the browser, reconnect, test. Oops. As you can see, yeah, and this is the JSON object. It looks just like a dictionary in Python. But we could open another connection. And that'll also work. So these are both running in Python, but they are running concurrently. However, they have no way to communicate between one another. So that's where the channels layer comes into play. So that's not a huge change. We actually don't need to change the JavaScript anymore. We're just going to change things on the server. Let me just get my bearings again. So the only thing, first thing we need to do is go into settings. We just need to make a quick change in settings and then change our consumer. So we need to add another thing in settings, which is the channels layer. So the channels layer takes care of, it can receive events from anything running, so including a consumer. A view could send an event to the channels layer. And then anyone listening on that group, and anyone meaning a consumer actually, will then can receive a message and then send it out. So you could have one person publish an event and it could go to everyone else. So in this case, we want when someone sends a message in our chat room, anyone else with that page open and connected to the socket will receive it. So in settings, we'll just specify the channels layer as another attribute. Channel layer. Channel layers, actually, you can have multiple. I'm not going to get into that. The default layer. And the backend for it will be what's called the channels layers in memory channel layer. And I'll get into what this means right at the end of the talk. I think we'll have enough time to cover that. So now, reloading. I think actually the fact that the socket never closed, I think, caused some problems on the server. But yeah, this is running just fine. Now we have access to the channels layer from anywhere in our site. So let's go ahead and we're gonna just get rid of this. Actually, first things first. As soon as we connect, we want to be able to receive messages from other people. So we need to connect to the channel layer. Unfortunately, you see, we do have to dive a little, do have to acknowledge here that the channel layer is asynchronous. I'm just curious, who's written any asynchronous Python? Anyone want to raise their hand in chat? Async await. Okay. So some things have to be able to run asynchronously, and in Python and async function. Synchronous function is kind of like oil and water. They just won't mix together. But there is a handy little utility we can import. So from ASGI ref.sync, and I'm pretty sure, not sure which version of Python this might be, and it's like 3.7 or 3.8. We can import the async to sync function. So we'll just need to use this to access the channels layer. So we need to use async to sync right here. And then our WebSocket consumer has a function, channel layer group add. So this will take this consumer, and this function has this async to sync is just to basically take this is a function and transform it into a synchronous function. That's all it's doing. So we're actually taking the arguments for this group add. So we're adding this consumer to this group chat. So anytime anyone sends information to the chat group, this consumer will receive it. We also need to just get the identity of this consumer channel name. There we go. And now when we receive, we don't want to just send it back to the user. We want to send it to the channel layer. So when we receive, we also again need to use async to sync. Self.channel layer.group send. And we send it to the chat group. And then we send in a dictionary, which has to have at least one key, which is type. And type is what will execute on any consumer that receives it. So that will be chat message. So chat message is a function that we'll have to define in just a second. And then we're going to put in our message, which is going to be the text data. So this message is actually, again, this text data is our JSON as a string. So we're just going to pass that through. So that's all we're going to do on the receive. We're not going to send anything. Now we need to define this chat message. So define chat message. And so this string is actually referring to a function. But if this function doesn't exist, there's not going to be any error or anything. Nothing will happen if this function isn't here. So chat message receives an event. So we'll just get the message from the event. The event is just a dictionary. And then here we're going to do self.send. So this is sending it back to the user across the WebSocket. Text data equals message. So now we're not actually bothering with the JSON at all, because we're just sending the string straight through back to the user. So actually we can get rid of this import JSON here. And then one last thing we technically don't need to do, but it's a good idea. We're just going to define disconnect. Close code. So this is just a function that gets called as soon as the chat socket disconnects. This will stop errors from happening. All we want to do on disconnect is to leave this group. So we don't want to be subscribed to it anymore. So async to sync, self.channel layer.group discard. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So we're discarding ourselves from the chat group and putting our channel name in here. Okay, I think that should be all good. This should just work now. I'm sure there's a mistake somewhere in there, but we'll just open back up again, do inspect so we can see the console, and test. And it seems to work. So we'll just open up another tab just to make sure. Test. And as you can see, it popped back up over here. Now this doesn't actually have, as you can see, the first message. These are out of sync. For that, we would need to actually use a model. So getting back into regular Django, Django model, and then save it to the database and repopulate it. But we're not going to do that today since we are running over the normal time. So again, just to reiterate what happens, as soon as I hit this button, JavaScript will register the event. It clears the box. It sends this over a WebSocket connection that's open to Django. Django has a WebSocket consumer, which will take that message, send it to the channels layer, which will distribute it to all the other consumers, which only happens to be this. But actually, it does send it back to itself, since this consumer right here is also subscribed. But it'll also send it to this consumer, where it'll go to that function and it'll send it to the user, where again JavaScript will get an event, and then it'll render it to this text box. All right, so any questions?
I'll ask a question while everyone's typing in their questions. So is that async to sync function needed because Django right now doesn't support asynchronous functions? So you're converting it between like channels and what Django can support, is that right?
Not quite, because we could use the async WebSocket consumer instead. And then all of these functions would be async. But I wasn't doing this for this tutorial. The problem is just actually more underlined in Python. You can't call an asynchronous function from a synchronous function. So if we said define or async define example down here, that does nothing, we couldn't call it from anything else. So if we wanted to call it from right here, if we wanted to call self.example, just doing this off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure this wouldn't work. So if we go back here, oh right, I'd have to add self. Maybe this would work. Okay, maybe I misunderstood that. Yeah, it's because Django doesn't. Yeah, Django does not support async right now. I thought that would demonstrate, but actually I just confused myself a little bit more. That's why I was avoiding async, because it is kind of a confusing topic. But yeah, when it comes to web development, there's yeah, no avoiding async these days. I don't think that quite answered your question, but yeah.
No, that did. Thanks. Probably in the future, maybe sockets wouldn't even be needed because Django itself would be async, right? Or I think that's what you said in the beginning.
Well, yeah, sockets will still be needed, but channels won't be needed necessarily.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry. Thanks. Yep.
And yeah, you could take Django views and make them async. So someday you'll be able to do like this and have async define Django view seeking asynchronous. And the big advantage of that is with async, if you do it correctly, you can have a lot more efficiency, a lot more throughput. Any other questions, Ed?
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, thanks, Paul, for...
Yeah, I was just going to mention one more thing.
Yep.
This channels layer here. So this is the in-memory channels layer, which is really helpful for development, but not so much for production, because Django is not very efficient at this whole dispatching of these messages. So you actually want to use a separate broker. So that's where you actually would use like Redis is you'd have a separate application. And that way you could have, for instance, in production, multiple instances of Django running on different virtual machines, and they could communicate through one central application. So you could actually have scalability that way. I just wanted to mention that.
What do the files represent on the left? I know some of them, like none
So
of
I
our views and
can't hear you very well. Could you put your question in chat?
So Trent was asking, what do some of the files represent on the left?
Oh yeah, I guess if you're a beginner to Django, then let's see. So we talked about views, so that's sort of the entry point. Tests, that's for testing. Routing, that handles taking in incoming requests for, in this case, Websockets, but we could support other protocols. And then sending them to our consumers. URLs, no, actually, I guess you don't have URLs right here. Apps and admin are kind of, actually not even 100% sure how I would describe these. Just adding a little bit more information there. Models is, and that's when you actually get into saving data. So an important thing to note with this application, nothing here is ever saved permanently, which is kind of the missing, glossing over probably what the best feature of Django is the Django ORM. Highly recommend if you're just starting on Django, that's a really great place to start. I literally like to use Django and if I was just doing something that I need a database for because I understand it so well and it's so straightforward. And then this is our application. We can have many of these, and then there's my site, which is just the main package, which has like our settings and a bunch of just higher level information about our website. So you have one of these and then multiple chat. This right
Hey, Paul, at least for me, I lost your audio.
Me too.
Is there, maybe this probably is a good time to end the...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yep.
Okay, yeah, I was just, I don't know what the last thing you heard was.
Oh, we just lost you like maybe 10 or 15 seconds ago, so.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's just one cool thing you can do with Django. Probably wouldn't be the first, if you're just learning Django, not the first thing, but yeah, eventually you can add real-time stuff using Django channels.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. That's really good.
You're